and it's fantastic to be here. I hope everybody can see Small Dave above this lectern after Alan's wonderful poem. And it's not very often you get the chance to actually follow, is it, behind Ireland's #1 poem and the mayor sort of thing, so I'll try and do it justice as much as I can. So as you heard from Alan, good morning, I'm Dave Philp, and it's a real honour to be here again at the BIM gathering. It's been a big part of my life, and one of the things I like to do is actually thank CitA. You know, CitA is doing amazing work, I think, in terms of industry advancement that's hugely important, both here in Ireland and worldwide. And Alan mentioned, you know, the importance of regional events, and for me that's hugely important as well. You can hear from my accent, I'm from Scotland, and one of the big things in Scotland we see is social mobility. You know, when we talk about BIM and technology change, it should not be something that's purely for the big cities. And if all we do is put these in big procurements and the big jobs, then it's going to get locked in. We need to make sure when we are sharing our ideas, actually the region should be the speedboats in making the real change happen as well. So, you know, big kudos to Alan, but also to the CitA team. That's been a big part of my life, being part of the team as well as there. As Alan said, you know, my background is I'm a construction manager and engineer, and I've kind of had an unexpected sort of turn in my career. I'm now Chief Value Officer for the Cohesive Group. So why did Alan, you know, invite me here today? Well, I've had the honour probably in the last 15 years leading some of the big digital change programmes, including UK Governance Journey to BIM Level 2, the Scottish programme, but also in wider crossover in some jobs across in Australia as well. So a big part of my job today is to try and take some lessons learned probably over the last 15 years as well. What did that kind of look like? And for me, it's been very unexpected. This is something, a slide I put together, not just myself. This was actually back in 2010. I was asked to set up a group by the Construction Industry Council, and it was called BIM 2050 for young professionals, to get 30 young professionals together. And that was actually a picture of me back in 2010 when my hair had a bit more colour in it, and I was a younger man back in those days. But you can see within there, we had this wedge. You know, we're going to move from this journey to BIM Level 1, BIM Level 2, into something in the future. And we said, what would it look like? So myself and there's a chap called Neil Thompson, we created, if you like, this cycle. And this is something we predicted. You say you're maybe naive within there. That's always, you know, they may be naive to look into the future, but this is what we thought it would look like. We saw 4 waves. The first wave you can see is quite high. That's the sort of the lag in terms of decision making. You make a decision, you're sharing CAD files, digital ink about. It took a long time to do it. But we saw moving from there to something that was going to become much more real-time decision making, digital decisions, especially that we're going to link capital expenditure in operation. And we saw wave 3 is probably where we predicted we'd be at this point in time just now. We said we'd move, if you like, from deterministic decision making to much more real time, much more thinking about, if you like, decisions very much here and now. But we also saw a move, if you like, to what we called probabilistic. We can start to look at the future, we can start to look in terms of, through machine learning, future trends analysis, and start to think about not just even CapEx and OpEx, but how our built assets affect societal performance, how does better air quality affect educational attainment. So start to think about how much more we can move, and indeed moving forward to the 4th wave, which we call that move towards artificial intelligence, and actually thinking about self-adaptive assets as well. So that was our attempt at looking at those 4 waves. And actually, you look back, I think it wasn't too bad a guess, actually, as to how the journeys turned out. But let's look at the first wave. And here, that was that journey we heard from the mayor about, you know, I was head of BIM implementation at the Cabinet Office. We called it the Wonder Years. You were trying to move industry from CAD, digital ink, to being collaborative. That was reality. That was 2010. How many, hands up, how many folk in here can actually remember 2010? So we're a bit of age there, but I'd say we're half folk have got memories of 20. That was reality. We're living off the back of the Lehman Brothers crash within there. At the same time, in terms of technology, projects were kicking off like Crossrail. Things like the tablet had only came into emergency. Imagine, we didn't have these things. We're still working very much on desktop, but with also things in the chart like Journey, you know, don't stop believing. I still think back then, we had a real imagination. You know, don't waste a good crisis, we wanted to change. But But at the same time, I remember being in the Cabinet Office, and that was a true story. The then chief, if like the Treasury officer, left a note on his desk. There's no money left. Literally, we were starting to see, if you like, a construction industry. I remember I was a contractor. We were bidding at minus 20% and still losing work. And by the way, government's telling you to change dramatically. So I think it was a big thing back then, because actually, if you asked to save 2%, well, you can't go at the supply chain and do that. But saving 20%, you had to do things fundamentally different. So BIM back then was seen as a big part of improving productivity and be a big hope in trying to close that gap that was there in terms of the economy. At the same time, we were hugely lucky. We had our first chief construction advisor, Paul Morrell. That's Paul in the picture there. And I met Paul a few times late. Paul gave up everything for that role. Imagine doing that, so you absolutely have no baggage, you can't be seen as biased within there. But Paul mentioned at the same time as the economy problem, we have one of our biggest problems in terms of carbon. Probably as a society, as an industry, you think how many millions of carbon we burn a year, but at the same time, what an opportunity to change it around. So we had two challenges back then, and I think it's important if you are going on a journey to actually understand the purpose. What is it you're trying to solve? Can you really frame the problem? And back then it was a case of, if cost is king, carbon's got to be queen. I'd probably say society now, it's probably flipped in terms of the other way around. We are very carbon driven, and I think when we think about our solutions digitally, we've now got to make sure we focus, but actually solving the issues that we've got and actually trying to understand the problems and really framing them. We heard as well from the Mayor that at the same time as all this, we've got ageing assets. We've got ageing estates all round about the world just now that we've got to think about how can we get them to perform better as well. So we actually in the UK brought two things together. We had this concept of BIM, but we also brought the concept of soft landings. How do better benchmark and actually measure performance of our assets as well? How many folk have heard these soft landings? Are there any hands up? Again, a good, this is obviously the better half of the sort of thing. But if you are going to go on a BIM journey, please, I would say, do not go on the BIM journey without considering soft landings. And you hear things like BIM level 2, ISO. It's a key component of it. This standard called BS 8536, hugely important. So what did we learn straight away? That actually you needed a well-unified strategy and plan. Now, anybody can have a strategy, anybody can have a plan, but as an industry, we can be hugely fragmented. One profession's got a plan, another one's got one over there, but actually I think back in 2010, we had a unified strategy and a very good plan. The industry was bought in. And it was a strategy that was cohesive in nature because it wasn't just a BIM strategy. It looked at other aspects, project bank accounts, government soft landings, were all part. And actually, why I think people say was BIM a success, I would say it was because it accelerated BIM adoption. And I think we framed the value proposition better than we did for carbon back then. And I think that's one of the key things. Be able to frame the value proposition so everyone understands it and can relate to it from a boardroom to the boiler room. So it must be really relatable in terms of that value proposition. It should be hugely clear. We also wanted to make sure there was a very good timetable round about it. That was Francis Maud, the Minister for the Cabinet Office back in the day. We had a 4.5-year programme to create a partnership between industry and the supply chain. And that was going to be, making sure there was a true partnership involving special academia. It was going to give industry time to look at and understand what's the requirements of the then BIM level 2, give time to change and upscale in terms of new capabilities. And that was thinking more and more about information management processes, time to retool, and that was if necessary. But probably the biggest thing we forgot about was time for behavioural change. What do we have to change in terms of behaviours? But trying to create a partnership. And on the left-hand side, you can see it was trying to create that healthy tension. It should be a tension. We can't be a push and pull. And I think there was, industry was challenging government. And at the same time, we brought everything together. That was what I looked like 10 years ago, Alan. I was still small, but I had colour in my hair. But, we brought industry together, and we had a really good roadmap that involved the professions. Everyone was kind of bought into that change as well. Another thing we've done, it was hugely, I think, valuable, was we brought everybody together. We called them the BIM 4 groups, these communities of practice, subject matter experts from water right the way through to understand through their optics, their challenges, their routes for change. And we actually built, if you like, a charter around about it as well. We got everybody to sign up in terms of trying to make change happen as well. So everybody pointing in the same direction. One of the things as well is we didn't know it was going to work. It was a hypothesis that we wanted to test. Or it was quite a simple one. And I think somebody mentioned Ronan had said this yesterday. Keep it simple. And that was really important for us as well. A simple hypothesis that we can actually improve cost, carbon, and value through that use of open shareable asset information. And there should be a question mark at it. We actually, if you go back to the original strategy, had 10 tests that we test within there. Is it valuable? Is it open? Is it going to still make sure that the SMEs can still compete within there as well? So make sure you've got tests within the roadmap. And it was elegantly simple. There was only a couple of things really when you look back at that strategy and the plan. Number one, it was trying to create capability to deliver, both within the supply chain and within the client. We also want to make sure we became good at defining information requirements, especially those that were procuring projects, and not just at the point of appointing a main contractor, but from business case stage on the way into handover. So really good at information requirements, but also from a legal point of view, looking at what models can be relied upon for and what we can actually use the data, what we now call an information protocol. And I'll make sure that with agreed model outputs as well, being able to become good at buying the right amount of information at the right time, what we now call a level of information need, right amount of information at the right time, being able to define it, hugely important. And probably the biggest part was the process, a defined process for information management and delivery. And if somebody said, where's the value in this BIM thing, I would say it's in the information management piece. We now move from a British standard to now ISO 19650. And again, these suites, I think, is where the real value lies. But also data exchange standards, hugely important. How do we get data from capital exchange, so capital delivery, into operational exchange? And over the years, we've had people like Bill East at the CitA gathering showing us the value of data. And now we all talk about things like artificial intelligence. At that point of view, we were trying to create the basic building blocks through BIM of getting industry used to actually building and exchanging data. So elegantly simple, as you can see, 6 key things within the plan. It was also about change management. You know, technology is great, isn't it? But if you don't change your lifestyle, then nothing happens, does it? You can get all these sort of great apps and everything, but if you don't change how you're going to make decisions, you can see with there we worked really hard to benchmark each of the government departments, understand when they made decisions, how they made them, and understand the people and cultural side of change as well. And that was hugely important. It's not just about process, it's not just about technology, it's about change management as much as anything. After that, I went back to the homeland, Scotland. It's almost as nice as Alan's hometown here, almost Alan. But you can see it's a bit different in nature because we are probably more regional, a bit like Ireland in nature. And one of the first things we've done was a capability assessment to understand where Scotland was across the regions. And it probably wasn't as advanced as England was at that time. So we created a policy, but also looked at our heritage assets, retained the state as well. So we created a policy that was actually about appropriate and proportionate, and I think that's a big, big message. I was seconded at the Scottish Future Trust, so you can imagine the idea was we had a very, if you like, a threshold. If projects were equal or above 2 million, then it was a mandate. They were required to go through a grading for a level of BIM, but also we encouraged projects below that because we had a return on investment calculator that's still live that you can go into that shows you the value. So even if you were a local authority or university, we are still encouraged to go for the BIM grading tool, and it was open to all. And it graded from an appropriate level of BIM, but we also had a portal and guidance, because one of the things we wanted to do that maybe HM government hadn't done so well was not just why, but how as well. And you can see if you go into, still go to the SFT portal, it takes you down to an activity level. What do I have to do as I go through each of the stages of a data life cycle? And on the right-hand side, what does it mean in terms of information? On the right, you can see a standard information management plan that actually breaks it down into playbooks to simplify information requirements. So when Scotland put its £1 billion educational investment estate out, this is a key part. Every one of the projects was actually creating the same data sets that can be used, aggregated. It was also the foundation for early digital twinnings in Edinburgh schools as well. Big part, though, again, similar to the HM government in England, was trying to create the collaboration, the governments around about it. You can see the sort of network. I was lucky enough to chair the group in the middle. It was linked to making sure we drove an implementation plan from mobilisation, Pathfinder projects to test ROI, and indeed make sure we had the BIM guidance and that launch of it as well. But you can see we worked with government in terms of who we're buying, if you like, the data, but also from industry and academia as well. So trying to create, if you like, that collaborative hub was a huge, huge part of the journey plan as well. I was also lucky enough to do some work in Australia. This was VDAS, a Victorian Digital Asset Strategy. Again, trying to bring the whole of their journey. And that was trying to bring BIM, digital engineering, and asset management together. You can see, again, simple in its elegance, a 5-step plan. Encouraged the use of a government, having, if you like, each department having a champion and a roadmap within there. And again, similar to UK, having clear requirements, but also becoming very good at focusing in terms of outcomes and de-risking, but also starting to think in terms of, if you like, no regrets. Be able to enable the future as well. If you want to move from BIM to digital twinning, to think about that journey in terms of what it goes like as well. I just mentioned as well, Alan mentioned, if you like, the free components within there. This is the World Economic Forum a few years back as well, put, if you like, an action implementation matrix together. Again, that showed, if you like, what government should do, what industry should do, and what companies should do. It was a very clear roadmap based around 3 key themes within there. And again, I would recommend that you have a look at it. But a big part was, again, in terms of, if like, setting that vision in terms of what we're doing. So again, it was about motivating, collaborating, and enabling industry. So again, it set out a clear roadmap. So these themes, I think, for all the 4 of them have came together very well. But if somebody said to me, what did it really look like, that unexpected journey? You can see up at the top left, the planned journey was a really smooth. We do BIM level 1, we move to level 2. Eventually, our journey stops, and industry will have kind of moved into level 3 because it's axiomatic. It kind of looked like that more down at the bottom. Industry going, no, we don't want to change. We've always done it that way. It's great, despite the fact it's high risk and we don't make any money. It became the UK BIM framework. We moved to CD. But on the right-hand side, how many folk have heard the term, who moved my cheese? A few folk. Now, if you haven't, please read it, put it in YouTube. It's a simple thing that every day you've got a bit of cheese in your maze. Now, your bit of cheese could be your work, it could be your own life within there, but you go after a goal, don't you? You maybe want something that's going to feed you. It might be your salary. You go into the maze, every day you take the same pathway to find your cheese, don't you? And it's all good. 2010, that's what we kind of done. We all ran into the maze. We done a wee bit of CAD, maybe sort of swinging it. It was all great. Well, was it really? And then government came along and moved the cheese, didn't we? We said, actually, we no longer want paper doors. We're going to move it. The industry were still running to try and find the original cheese, going, where's the cheese gone? No longer can we find the cheese. And imagine they went down that loop of despair, going, you're asking us to change. You want us to go in a different direction. Now, at the same time, some early adopters, I remember as a company in London, David Miller, a small architectural practice, was curious. And I will remember this. David was always interested in what was happening next. And he was the first, I think, one of the first to find out where the cheese was, the new cheese. And he could take advantage of it because he was always curious. He was always looking what happened. And I think that's a big thing. Industry is always changing. We're always moving that cheese. We've got to be adaptive. We've got to keep thinking in advance. We can't be always locked down in terms of doing things the same way. So finally, the question is, have we reached an inflection point? Is doing BIM the norm? Is that our business as usual? Are we some folk, are we not? But I think we're on to these waves now of what 3 and 4 could look like. The Centre for Digital Built Britain has given us, if like, the generic answer as to what a digital twin is. You can see that virtual representation, starting to think about connectivity in the physical environment within there. We can start to make, digitization and past, present, simulate predicted futures within there. It's starting to give us a vision back to what that could look like. Again, if you haven't, the program's finished, but the Centre for Digital Built gave us real ideas of what that looked like. It also gave us a really good framework that I think you should think about as well, no matter what your change program. It's like a filter. Drop your program into it against these 9 elements. Does it have purpose? Is it going to create value? Is it trustworthy and secure? Is it going to be built upon quality data? And will it function? Can you federate it? Can it evolve within there? So it becomes a really good test. It's called the Gemini Principles. It was aimed at digital twins, but please, it can be used for anything. And within there as well, it creates a great baseline as to how to create a really good roadmap, which I would actively encourage you to look at as well. And finally, before we move on to quick lessons learned, think about digital twinning now and how BIM fits in with the digital twin. Think about digital twins, the use data acquisition, IT/OT, real-time data, that feeds this thing called big data and deep learning. So one of the things is they start to get some thinking about BIM's no longer in isolation. It's now going to start to think about data sharing with digital twinning. There's a relationship with data in terms of IT and OT, and machine learning become a huge part. We're doing work just now with the Chartered Institute of Building to look at AI and machine learning within the built industry and natural language processing. You could do a whole conference on it, but digital twinning and BIM are coming together, and it's starting to create new capabilities within the supply chain. So please, I would actively encourage you, get involved, have a look what this looks like. At the same time, we're starting to see things now such as the construction metaverse. This is one of our chat, Greg Demchek, has been over in Dublin. He's looking within a reactor there. You can see him there. He's looking in terms of the immersive reality. He's working with people, 35 countries around the globe, that can come into that same model and collaborate in real time and make decisions in a rendered network. So imagine being able to do that in real time. Virtual design and constructing within that metaverse environment. So waves 3 and 4 are starting to happen. So very quickly, what are the lessons learned? Well, do you pick something complex or simple? Definitely, keep it very simple as you can. Make sure your plan is understood, it's relatable, but also the change needs are within there as well. Create a line of sight as to the why. This is the UK government's one. You can see up at the top, right, their goal outcomes, United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, going through policy. But there's a clear line of sight now between the data they're producing and the high-level goals. So that line of sight, so it's relatable and everyone understands it. And think about creating a line of sight to your objectives. This is what we do within Cohesive. We say, you're going to a transformation program. You create North Stars. You go through a periods of change. Create horizons. Might be your own waves within there. What does good look like? What is your objectives and your key there? And then start to think about your quick wins. How do you start to get the flywheel spinning? What are the quick wins, the changes you can make before you go with that longer-term journey? But think about the change management, taking people with you, doing trial projects, hugely important. But lastly, just one big thing I think I've learned in the last 12 years. We are guilty as heck as waiting on one thing, aren't we? We wait in government to move before we move. I do not believe now that the first mover needs to be government, it needs to be industry. We need to stop waiting on them to make change happen. And actually, I think to some point, we need to tell them more what we want. We need to have a voice from there that's telling them. So the big part I'm saying, especially in the backdrop of an incredible climate change within there, aging assets that are starting to fail, inaction, I think, would be an opportunity lost and actually an indictment if we don't make this. Do not wait in government. Make the change. Keep it simple. And thank you for listening to the small Scotsman. So thank you for your time.